Dr. Theophilus, you mentioned in your lecture about the Samaritan woman that she was thirsty because she came every day or maybe some days to have water from the well. And this is exactly like many nowadays when they are depending on the relics, the icons, the traditions, and all of this. If you go back to the Bible, you find that in many passages and in many locations that God honored His saints and His people, maybe using their bones after their death, like Elijah, to heal or even to raise from dead. And also Paul, in the book of Acts, we find that the dirty clothes from his sick body used to heal many sicknesses. So how can you answer this? Mike is yours.
Well, in the Bible it's true. God uses all kinds of different things to convey healing. But of course the bones don't heal. But since they were associated with Elijah or Elisha, the connotation is, that they were close to God and they were His people. And so that this power was granted to them while they were living, and apparently glows a little bit after they're dead. We're told that Simon Peter, when he walked down the street, if his shadow fell on people, they were healed. And yes, we're told of Paul when he was in Ephesus, they rented the hall of a pagan philosopher from about 11 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. The reason they could rent it at that time was beastly hot in Turkey that time of the afternoon. And it said that the rags were taken from Paul's body. The Greek word is pseudophoros or something like that. Well, they're sweat rags around his waist and around his neck and maybe around his head. And they get sopping wet as Paul would lecture in 110-degree heat for an hour or two. And they took these sweat rags to people and laid them on them, and they were healed. But this was a special thing in the origins of the gospel. Paul talked about the fact that he had to often substantiate and defend his apostleship. And he said that God enabled him and granted him to do the works of an apostle, the signs of an apostle, miracles and things like that. But what was true of the apostles is not true of average Christians today. You can take all the sweat rags and towels and washcloths and socks and everything else from me and lay them on somebody and they won't get well. They might get sick or worse. I don't believe there are any apostles in the world today. I think that's a once-for-all office. They are part of the foundation of the church. They're not part of the 56th floor of the church. And this is an answer to the Mormons, for instance, to say that there are living prophets and that the word and messages of living prophets cancels out or supersedes that of former prophets. So, for instance, St. Paul said something, well, a modern-day prophet of the LDS Church says something different. Who will you listen to? They said to the modern prophet, of course. But this is wrong. So the miracles, the Old Testament, yes, Elijah, Elisha, and so forth. New Testament, Paul, Peter, John, all were granted the gift of miracles. But this becomes dangerous. I'm told that the tomb of Peter, both Peter and Paul perished in Rome. And of course there were a great many Christians by that time, and they highly honored and respected both Peter and Paul. That's why we have St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, but we also have a church dedicated to St. Paul. And their bones, there's a real possibility that the bones of St. Peter are behind or underneath the high altar in St. Peter's Cathedral. In the early days, in 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, the tomb of Peter had a grate over it. It was a casket, and it was in the ground, and there was a grate over it. And I'm told that pilgrims would come, and they would take handkerchiefs and pieces of cloth, attach it to a stick, and stick it down through the grate, and have it touch the sarcophagus, or the casket of St. Peter, and then retrieve it out through the grate and pin it to their body someplace, hoping that they would get well. They did the same thing for other saints. Then eventually they did it for their bones. And by the time of the Reformation, Martin Luther's elector, which was like a king under the emperor, he established a museum of relics. And he had like 100,000 different relics in it. And if you venerated all these relics, you accumulated a lot of time off in purgatory. And Luther, of course, had to attack that. For one thing, it had become a racket. In this museum, there were hairs from the beard of Moses. There were feathers from the dove that Noah released in the ark. There were hundreds of splinters from the real cross of Jesus. There were eggs laid by the dove that that Noah let out of the ark. And all of these were frauds. So a farmer would go out and pull some hairs out of the tail of his donkey and sell them to the elector and say, these are genuine hairs from the beard of Moses, or maybe from the beard of Jesus. See? And this is sad, because this is victimizing and taking advantage of humble people, uneducated people, that they attribute some mysterious power to these things. My stepfather was from a country of Yugoslavia, and his religion was a mixture of Islam and Christianity, and he never knew which was which, but he picked those up as a child. But he recounted, and his eyes would get real big, the time when they brought the bones of some saint, some ancient person, through the city, and how all the people with great admiration and awe, himself included, witnessed the actual bones of one of the early apostles or whatever. This is pathetic. In St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, they have a statue of Simon Peter, but it's made out of black ebony, if I remember correctly, a solid black stone. Maybe it's obsidian, I don't know. But it's a large statue of Peter sitting on a throne. The problem is the sculptor who did it, he didn't have his proportions right. His head is tiny compared to the rest of his body. His head looks half-size and very narrow and very small. And this statue of this black stone of Simon Peter is in the early part of St. Peter's Cathedral. And when I was there, I noticed a line of people 20 feet long back away from this, and they all came up and kissed the toes of this statue, and people have been doing this for centuries so that his toes were worn smooth. There was no separation between his toes because they would have been all worn off by... Just think how many countless millions of people must have kissed the feet of this statue. And this was regarded, these people were pious, good, humble people. But this is so sad. And there are altars, for instance, in Spain, I don't know if there still is, but there were, that from the time that the Spaniards conquered and explored South America, and they found great quantities of gold, platinum, and this sort of thing. And some of the altars then were decorated with gold. And here you have people desperately poor, for whom a loaf of bread was a treasure, and yet they worship in a church where the altar is covered with gold and platinum and precious stones. This is so far wrong. We don't honor God by building magnificent buildings in His honor, and expensive paintings and sculptures and this kind of thing. They're all right, but what a waste of money. And when there's so many poor people in this world, so many children that need medical care, when in some countries, I have a friend who goes to Nigeria, and he saves up money and he goes back there, and he's part of a family of like 16 people, and with $1,500 American money, all 16 of those people can survive for a whole year. And he told of a Muslim man who was very discouraged. He had a small motorcycle, and a clutch or a gear or something had broken in it, and this man had a family, and he used to give people a ride for like 25 or 50 cents, equivalent of it. But with a sprocket broken, or what it was on his motorcycle, he could do nothing. So my friend, for $5, got his motorcycle fixed and put the man back in business. The church, we need to expend the lion's share of our efforts and our money on people, and not on ornate structures and magnificent things. This isn't the way to honor God. I think I've said enough, maybe a little bit too much.